All right, so we are just going to practice writing some of these transformations in regards to reflections. So if I want to reflect x to the fourth across the y-axis, basically all that means is that I'm going to, instead of having positive x, I'm going to change it to negative x, and it's still going to be to the fourth. All right, so some of you might be sitting there and saying, well, it doesn't matter because if I have an even exponent, I'm going to get a positive answer, and you would be correct. So what this tells me is this starting graph, it was already symmetric across the y-axis, so it had a mirror image across the y-axis. But if I want to play the game, that's how I would write it. For letter B, this time we're going to reflect across the x-axis, which means we want to flip this graph upside down. And all we have to do is just simply multiply every single thing in this problem by -1. So I usually put parentheses around this and a -1 outside, and that's kind of my cue. Oh, okay, here we go. So negative x cubed plus 3x squared. And I think I actually have, I did type these answers because my handwriting's not very good. All right, letter C, if I want to switch and make it go reflect across the x-axis, that just means I multiply it by -1. So you can either write -1 over x, you can write -1 over positive x, or 1 over negative x. It's not going to matter. You're basically going to get the mirror image of that weird function. All right, letter D. So if we want to reflect our line upside down, we're just going to switch everything to negatives. So -2x minus 1. E may look more complicated because there's more stuff in it, but as long as you just follow the rules that I told you, where you either multiply everything by -1 or you switch x to negative x, it's really not that bad. So this time we want to reflect horizontally. So all I really have to do is just change x to a negative x and everything else stays the same. It's amazing that if you graph those two, they are going to be reflected from each other. And then last but not least, we have another, looks kind of a longish quadratic, but we just want it to be upside down, right? So all that means is I don't want to mess with what's in the parentheses. I just mess with what's in front, all right? So the 3 is going to become negative, and the 4 that's not in the parentheses, that also becomes negative. So the things that are in the parentheses, leave them alone, okay? They can only change if you have a horizontal shift, either left or right. Other than that, they stay the same, so don't touch them. All right, just touch the things that are in front of them and anything that's outside of them. All right, so I think I'll try to do letter A and then I'll save B, C, and D for the next video. All right, so we have square root of x minus 1. That's like our starting graph, okay? We want to reflect that across the x-axis. So the first thing I want to do is basically flip it. All right, so right now it kind of looks like an uphill quadratic, or excuse me, an uphill square root. And now I want to flip it so it's a downhill. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to change it to negative root x and change this to a positive 1. From there, I want it to shift up 4 units. Well, that's pretty simple. That's just plus 4. So my answer should be negative root x plus 5. And just so that you can visualize what's happening, okay, good old Desmos, here's letter A kind of broken down into those two separate steps. So I have my starting graph, right, shifted down 1, and it's still increasing. And the first thing I want to do is flip it upside down. So this graph has now been flipped, right? And if I were to have you write the formula for this line, you would say, oh, it's negative root x because it's upside down, and it's also increased by 1. So whether you multiply this whole thing by -1 or you look at the graph and then write me the formula, you get the same outcome. And from there, we want to move it up 4 units. So if we just tack on 4 to that, we get plus 5. Or if I gave you this picture and I said, write me the formula, you would cover the upside down part with a negative and the y-intercept is 5. So either way you look at it, you end up with the same graph.